Hello, welcome to episode 6 of Europe 1007. So today I'm going to explain how I ended up at quite possibly the worst football derby I have ever watched. I know you're probably thinking, how could a football derby be that bad? Intensity, passion, how could it be that bad? 6 goals, how could it be that bad? Well, this was the Turin derby between Juventus and Torino. Two teams in the same city of Turin. But why was it so disappointing? Well, a little bit of context behind the match. Juventus have won every single match against Turin in the last 8 years. Torino have failed to register a single win against their local rivals, Juventus. So it makes the derby a bit one-sided and quite flat. The expectation is very high for Juventus to win every time. It's a bit diminishing for the other side coming into the match. However, this time, last season, there was a ban placed on the Juventus Ultras. If you've been following football world, you'll understand that Juventus were in quite a tricky situation with the financial board, with the fans, with the actual team themselves. Quite the fall off from the grace they had of winning 10, 11 Scudettos. And now they find themselves in quite a predicament. And because of this financial situation, there has been a ban placed on the Ultras. So the Ultras are not allowed to bring flags, banners, pyros, tifos, smoke bombs, anything, because they will get fined by the Serie A. And the fines are quite high for these kind of things by the disciplinary board. And the club can't afford to actually pay these fines, so they've told their ultras, you can't come to the matches because you will cost the club a lot of money. So, when you put that into perspective, it tends to ruin an atmosphere, you know? And Juventus in that season struggled with their attendances. Attendances were quite low, probably an all-time low they've experienced in the last 20, 30, 40 years of the club in the Serie A. And how I actually got to Juventus, why I decided I want to go to this match. This was before I was quite deflated after the experience. But why I went to Juventus is I was in Tottenham the day before, and I was at Tottenham Chelsea and that week. So this is my recovery back to feeling good about myself again in life. And I said to myself, okay, I want to go to all these matches. And I looked up on Skyscanner, sponsor me, and I looked up on Skyscanner and I seen flights to Turin for 16, 17 euro, I think. And I was like, okay, there must be a match on somewhere. But lo and behold, the Turin derby was on the Tuesday. I was flying on the Monday. And I said to myself, I have to go. This is a derby I've always wanted to experience growing up. I've always heard about it. It looks so cool, so engaging, so interesting, so passionate, so intense. What could possibly go wrong? I have to go. You know, I can somehow find a way to get a ticket. I got a ticket. Ticket was about 50 euro, which is quite expensive in Italy, as you'll see. And ticket was 50 euro, standard procedure, just registered for a free account on the club website, bought the ticket, no problem. I was at the other side from where the ultras were supposed to be, and I was in like the main long stand, so I wasn't in a very loud part of the ground. It was kind of not a family stand, but it was very relaxed where I went. So Turin itself is what I would call a deceptively beautiful city. In terms of when you arrive to Turin, and I'll speak about it later on, I found that it's funny to say, but the colour scheme of the actual city is very bleak, very kind of dull. And then with the February weather, it just didn't seem very appealing on the first glance of things. But the more I explored the city and the more I went into these little niche parts of the city, and I went to the museums and I went across the river and I was seeing all of these cool little attractions and touristy things, I thought Turin is really, really cool. There's actually quite a lot to do, quite a lot to explore. And to only have about a day and a half in Turin, I was like, fuck. I was like, I'd love to do a bit more here. But I went around the city, really, really cool. What do I remember from Turin? I remember being in an art museum and speaking to these French girls from Lens. They were cool. I got to flex a bit of my French because I speak a bit of French. What else did I do? Oh, there was this woman. Apparently, it's quite common in Italy. So what she did was she had this stool, and she put the stool. So when the traffic light stopped, she'd go out and she put the stool down, and she was doing like headstands on the stool, and she was doing all these acrobatic tricks, and she was hoping people would pay her money while the traffic light stopped. It was very strange. It's very common, apparently. I think it's a lot of Eastern Europeans that come to these cities and they perform these kind of tricks and acts and stuff like that. Very bizarre to me, but it was very funny to see. And then I met Zach. So Zach was a random guy I met in my hostel in Turin. Very good place, actually. It was about 48 for the 2 nights, I think, if I remember correctly. A very nice place, very, very nice. And I met Zach. So I'm going to show you who Zach is, and Zach's going to explain his story, how we met each other, and what he thought about the Turin Derby. So this is Zach, a random stranger I met all the way in Turin. Zach, if you could explain how we ended up in the same hostel together and how we ended up at the, I would say, the worst derby I've been to.
Yeah, it wasn't ideal. So I was going travelling to Italy for I was in the winter, and basically I finished my job, and I just thought, you know what, I'll just go travelling, and then looked wherever the cheapest flights were. So then went to Italy and went all around Italy for 2 weeks. I went to the San Siro, went to Lecce away games, Bologna away games. I just kind of fell in love with going to watch European football just because the atmosphere is so sick. And then my last game was the Turin Derby. So I think the game before I was in, I can't remember where I was, but it was a couple of years ago now. But I went into the hostel in Turin because I'd been staying at the cheapest hostels I could. Went into the hostel and was signing in, and he was like, "Oh, I've just basically I've had a really quiet morning, and we're really quiet at the moment. So I've been looking this morning about upgrading people. So I see that you're in a room right now, and I can upgrade it to a nicer room with a couple more people, because the room you're in right now, nobody would be staying in it." And I was like, "Yeah, fine." So that sounds good, thanks mate. And then walked up to my room, and basically in that room there was some random
One second, that fell down. Yeah, carry on.
So in that room there was some random European bloke, and then you in that room, and we just got talking, and essentially hang on, let me just move that. Essentially, we both found out that we love football, and we were going around Europe watching football, and we were like, "Oh, are you going to watch football? Are you watching a football game in a bar later?" And then one of us was like, "Nah, I'm going." And I was like, "Nah, shut up, I'm going." So we were like, "Do you want to go watch it together?" And yeah, we walked down and watched it together, and I was so hyped to go watch it, because I'd been on Lecce away games that were absolutely insane, and the ultras are so mental and so much fun. I loved them. And the San Siro was crazy as well. I went with my other mates, and I was like, Juventus versus Torino, it's the Turin Derby. It's a huge game. It was also Pogba's game back from being injured, so I was gassed about it, and I thought it'd be sick.
What was your first impression of the stadium when we got there?
The stadium was cool. I like the stadium, especially the inside. It was we got in quite early. I like getting games early so you can see it fill out. And the stadium was so cool. It was quite modern on the inside, compared to the San Siro. When I went to the San Siro, there was just a little hole for the toilet, but there was toilets in the Allianz. And the stadium was really cool. But as it started to fill up, it was quite. I was right next to. Oh shit, we got shit Wi-Fi. It was quite eerie and quite quiet, and I was right next to ultras. Ultras, and they weren't. They before the start of the game, they weren't very loud, and it was kind of just a chill atmosphere. It was a bit odd, a bit weird.
And what were you expecting from the match?
I think I'd heard about problems with the Juventus ultras, but I didn't really make any of it because I just thought it'd be a policy. I'd heard the club had a problem with the ultras, and there was some sort of argument going between the club and the ultras going on, and but I kind of just assumed that it would just be a policy that was on the cover. But then when you actually watched and I thought the atmosphere would be really good, especially I thought maybe for lower league games it wouldn't be very good and it would be a bit more chilled, but because it was the derby and such a big it's the only two major clubs in that city. I thought it'd just be like every other derby I've been to, and like a massive game and like huge for bragging rights within the city. But it just wasn't. It felt so odd. It felt like a bit like a friendly. Like there was no like hostility and no like really good atmosphere, and it just felt like everyone was kind of subdued. It was very odd.
It felt very flat for a game that had 6 goals.
Yeah, that's the word. It was flat. Like the stadium was full, but it was just quiet and flat, and like there was cheering when the goals went in, but there was no like constant jumping up and down like I'd seen at all jumping up and down and creating an atmosphere like I'd seen at all other European games.
What did you make of the actual city of Turin? Because I was quite a big fan of it.
Yeah, I loved it. It was so pretty. It was so pretty. It was so much better than I thought it was going to be. Because like when you go to Italy, everyone was like, "Oh, you're going to Venice, you're going to Naples, you're going to Milan," and I was like, "I'm not going to Naples. I couldn't get Napoli tickets, so I was like, there's no point going down there." So I went to Turin, and everyone was like, "No one really like. It's not a big household city name, but it was so pretty. Like, yeah, it was such a pretty city. I loved it."
I think it was one of those cities that's deceptive because of the colour of the city. It seems it looks quite dull. It's funny to say like the actual like colour scheme of a city, but the colour scheme of the city looked very kind of like pale and a bit dull to me. But once you actually explore it, there's so much to see and do across the city, and it's somewhere I'd love to go back.
We climbed a massive hill. I can't remember what it was called, like a massive hill or mountain or whatever, and the view across the city was insane. And I got some really good pictures from like across the city. It was so good. I loved it. And I remember that, and I also remember the Turin derby was actually the day before I was flying back to England, and when because we got in quite late because the football's quite late in Italy, and I slept through my alarm, and the next morning so close to nearly missed my flight back to England. I
remember that. I remember the rush of trying to make sure you got to your bus because your bus was delayed by about 3 hours. And I had to do everything possible to get you to the train station so you could make it to the airport.
We were frantic. I think that's the moments though that make it fun. Like it's such a cool experience and something that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Just going to European games and just it's so different to England. Like you don't understand it until you've done it. Like it's just so cool, and I'm just addicted to it. Ever since I took the first European game I ever went to, I took my dad to Paris, and I took my dad to watch PSG when it was Messi, Mbappe, Neymar for Christmas because he'd never seen Messi and he really wanted to, and I just fell in love with it. Like the whole game, I was just watching the football, but mainly watching the ultras opposite me, and it was insane. I loved it.
And finally, what would you recommend to someone? You were 19 at the time?
Yeah, I was 18, 19.
18, 19 at the time. What would you recommend to someone who's loves football, wants to experience these kind of matches, but's a bit afraid of where to start and how to actually travel? What would you recommend to people?
I think it is hard because like I was so naive. Like I went to watch Leeds away and I threw up on the train so I got travel sick, and then it was a Sunday, so in Italy all the shops are shut. So the only shop that was open was the Atalanta home shop, and I forgot I was in the Lecce away end. I had to buy trousers, so I threw up all over them, and bought Atalanta tracksuits that were like 3 sizes too big because that's all they had, and I had to pull them up so they didn't get like discovered and I didn't get beaten up or whatever in the away end. But it's actually everyone loves it. Everyone, as long as you're respectful to the club, and you don't have your phone out the whole time, and you just get involved in it, then you'll love it. It's so good, especially like just go for it. Like I was nervous about it, but I went to I think the smaller games are personally my favourite. Like I went to San Siro, it was amazing, but I spoke about it all the time. Lecce away, it was unbelievable, and the tickets were like €10, and I just was looking at flights it was like in maybe February or something, because it's in the winter, it's so much cheaper. I was looking at flights and it's so cheap. Like my flight to Italy was like €3 and my ticket in the San Siro was less than €20. It's so cheap. Just work for a bit and then travel and go and watch games. I wish I'd done more, like not just Italy. I wish I went to maybe like random countries by the side. And now I'm trying to save money to go, but balancing it with uni and the student budget. The girlfriend doesn't really want to go and watch like a random team in the middle of Slovenia when she could get quite hot.
No, I remember this whole match so fondly, the whole experience, and I remember even who was the guy in our room. He was like Moldovan.
Yeah, he was like this random Moldovan who looked like he was very odd.
He was very dodgy, and I just remember. Yeah. I remember meeting you and hearing your stories about how you travelled to all these places and all the things you've done in the space of 2 weeks by yourself at 19, 18. And I just thought that's incredible.
It is hard. Like, I did have moments on that trip where I was homesick and I phoned my parents and whatever. It is hard, but like that was such a good experience for me because I watched 6 games in Italy for under €100, and like travelling around Italy, like a Flixbus from Milan to Rome, which is like the whole length of the country, was €5, and it's so cheap. Just get yourself out there and have fun and try and do it.
Exactly. And I think this is probably, it's a shame I don't have all the footage from the match of when we met and everything, but definitely in the future. I mean, I'm 100% going to take you somewhere else. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of time and and that kind of thing. But you were one of the first people I met solo traveling that just kind of reinforced my, I suppose, my belief that this is what I want to do. This is how I want to live my life. This is how I want to travel. This is how I want to meet people. And I'll always remember it very fondly. So I was incredibly happy to meet you. And it was, even though it wasn't a brilliant football experience, I always say football is the least important thing that you watch on a match.
Yeah. People you meet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
it was class.
We will see Mr. Zach some point in the future. This episode is very early days, but we will see Mr. Zach at some point in the future, and we will get him properly on Europe 1807. Thank you very much for today. Absolute pleasure as always to talk to you.
No worries, you too.
So why was this the most disappointing derby I've been to? There's a few obvious reasons. Obviously, the club is in a very bad league position. They were about 9th or 10th at the time. They had quite the come down from winning all the Scudettos in a row, I think 10 or 11. Cristiano Ronaldo had just left them, and they were in that kind of phase of, we need to rebuild our squad again. You know, we've had our peak, and we've hit quite a wall. And Juventus fans, they will fully understand this. But also the direction of the financial board and the ultras. So there was no ultras in the actual stadium. So you take away ultras from a football match, no atmosphere. Take away football fans from a derby, and there's not going to be a great atmosphere. And the ground didn't sell out as well. It was about 37,000 out of 41,000. I don't know exactly, but there must have been some kind of limitation on the away fans, because there was about between 500 to 1,000, and it was nowhere near full. And I think Torino could have filled half the stadium if they wanted to. So there was only a couple hundred fans. The Torino fans weren't bad; they were pretty good actually for the numbers they had. But there was no hostility, there was no intensity throughout the match, both on the pitch and off the pitch. The football match was actually quite good, 6 goals. Pogba returned. Juventus actually played quite good football. Torino played good football in the first half, and then they kind of capitulated. So overall, it was a good football match, but a football experience itself, it let itself down for the reasons I've explained. And that's a shame, because I think this could have been one of the coolest episodes on Europe 1807. But it just didn't fall into place. And as you heard Zach speak, it felt very flat. Very flat. The atmosphere was very flat. And even beside me there was Torino fans. And for a football derby, it's just very weird to have both sets of supporters in the same area and there's no trouble or no conflict about it. I'm not saying fucking beat the head off them or anything like that, but it takes away from the actual meaning of the match, that two supporters sit beside each other when the perception of football, it's not segregation, but the perception of football is that there's an imaginary divide, I suppose, if you want to call it like that. And it just didn't feel like we were actually watching a football derby. It felt, as Zach said, it felt like Man City versus Brentford, and you knew who was going to win, even though Brentford seemed to always win against Man City or get a result. But you kind of knew what the outcome was going to be. Even though the Torino goals were very surprising, and it kick-started the atmosphere a bit, and when Juventus scored and the crowd got a bit involved, and it just kind of, the more goals went in for Juventus, the more the atmosphere declined. And I left that match thinking, would I want to come back here again? Probably not. For the money spent to go to most likely the biggest match of the season at Juventus, unless they're actually fighting for the title or they're playing against someone like Inter Milan or AC Milan or Napoli or Roma or whatever, the big teams, it was a letdown. So I'm not saying don't go to Juventus. I think Juventus will find their feet again and the ultras will return. The club will be more financially stable and they'll be competing again for the Scudetto and European places. But in this current moment of time, I probably wouldn't recommend to go to Juventus. If you want the full experience of Juventus, I would say wait. Wait until the club sorts itself out, and then I would go back to Juventus. But yeah, that was my experience at the Turin derby. Disappointing, deceiving, but not regrettable. So, that was episode 6 of Europe 1 7. Grazie Millie. Ciao ciao.